Question 1. Operational review demonstrates that a driver in Dublin, Ireland, approaches a section of road where debris is visible, potentially indicating a hazard. The driver is currently traveling at the speed limit. What is the most professionally responsible course of action to ensure compliance with Irish road traffic regulations and safe driving practices? Option A. Reduce speed significantly. Observe the debris and surrounding area to assess the nature and immediacy of the hazard, and proceed only when it is definitively safe to do so. Option B. Accelerate to pass the area quickly before the debris can cause an issue. Option C. Maintain the current speed and proceed through the area without altering the vehicle's pace. Option D. Stop the vehicle abruptly in the lane to get a closer look at the debris. Correct answer is A. Reduce speed significantly. Observe the debris and surrounding area to assess the nature and immediacy of the hazard, and proceed only when it is definitively safe to do so. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a driver in Dublin, Ireland, as they must navigate a situation involving a potential hazard and adhere to the Road Traffic Acts and associated regulations governing safe driving practices. The challenge lies in accurately assessing the situation, prioritizing safety, and making a decision that aligns with legal requirements and ethical driving conduct, all while under the pressure of potentially causing an obstruction or delay. Careful judgment is required to balance immediate safety with the broader implications of their actions on traffic flow and other road users. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a cautious and proactive approach to potential hazards. This means slowing down significantly, observing the situation carefully to determine the nature and immediacy of the hazard, and only proceeding when it is absolutely safe to do so, even if it means temporarily stopping or causing a minor delay. This approach aligns with the fundamental duty of care imposed on all drivers under Irish road traffic law, which mandates that drivers must not endanger themselves or others. Specifically, Section 41 of the Road Traffic Act 1961, as amended, places a general duty on drivers to exercise reasonable care and to avoid causing danger or obstruction. By slowing down and assessing, the driver is fulfilling this duty. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves accelerating to quickly pass the potential hazard. This is professionally unacceptable as it disregards the potential for the hazard to materialize into a danger, thereby violating the duty of care and potentially contravening Section 41 of the Road Traffic Act 1961. It prioritizes speed and convenience over safety. Another incorrect approach is to stop abruptly without adequate warning or consideration for following traffic. While stopping might seem safe, doing so without assessing the situation or signaling appropriately can create a new hazard for vehicles behind, potentially leading to collisions. This fails to consider the broader impact on traffic flow and the safety of other road users, which is also an implicit requirement of responsible driving under Irish law. A further incorrect approach is to assume the hazard is not serious and to proceed at normal speed without any reduction. This demonstrates a failure to exercise reasonable care and a disregard for the potential risks, directly contravening the driver's obligation to be aware of and react to potential dangers on the road. As stipulated by the general principles of safe driving and the Road Traffic Acts, professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a risk assessment framework. First, identify potential hazards. Second, assess the severity and likelihood of the hazard. Third, determine the safest course of action that minimizes risk to oneself and others, while also considering the impact on traffic. This involves applying legal obligations, such as the duty of care under the Road Traffic Acts, and ethical considerations of responsible road use. When in doubt, err on the side of caution and prioritize safety over expediency. Question 2. Strategic planning requires understanding the regulatory landscape. An individual approaches a licensing office in Ontario stating they have misplaced their driver's license, which has recently expired. They urgently need to drive for work. What is the most appropriate course of action to ensure compliance with Ontario's licensing laws and promote road safety? Option A. Recommend the individual obtain a driver's license from another jurisdiction if they have ties there, as this might be a quicker solution than dealing with a lost and expired Ontario license. Option B. Advise the individual to apply for a replacement license immediately and explain the process for obtaining a temporary permit if available while awaiting the new license, ensuring they understand they cannot legally drive until they have a valid license in hand or a temporary permit. Option C. Suggest the individual drive using their expired license, assuring them that as long as they have proof of application for a new license, it should suffice. Option D. Allow the individual to drive with their expired license for a short period, with the understanding that they will visit a Service Ontario Centre as soon as possible to renew it. Correct answer is B. Advise the individual to apply for a replacement license immediately and explain the process for obtaining a temporary permit if available while awaiting the new license, ensuring they understand they cannot legally drive until they have a valid license in hand or a temporary permit. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for a driver to operate a vehicle with the legal and safety requirements mandated by the Ontario Ministry of Transportation, MTO. The driver's situation presents a potential conflict between personal urgency and public safety regulations. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance without undue delay, while also upholding the integrity of the licensing process. The best professional practice involves verifying the validity of the driver's existing documentation and guiding them through the correct channels for renewal or replacement. This approach prioritizes adherence to Ontario's Highway Traffic Act and MTO regulations concerning driver's licenses. Specifically, it aligns with the MTO's procedures for handling expired or lost licenses, which typically involve applying for a replacement or a new license if the old one is significantly out of date, and ensuring all necessary identification and fees are submitted. This method upholds the legal framework for driver licensing, ensuring that only qualified and properly licensed individuals operate vehicles on Ontario roads, thereby promoting public safety. An incorrect approach would be to allow the individual to drive based solely on their verbal assurance of having a license, even if it's expired. This fails to comply with the Highway Traffic Act, which mandates a valid driver's license for operation. Another incorrect approach would be to suggest the individual drive with the expired license until they can visit a Service Ontario Centre, as this knowingly permits an illegal act and contravenes public safety regulations. Finally, advising the individual to obtain a license from another province or country without proper verification and adherence to Ontario's specific licensing requirements would also be a failure, as Ontario has its own set of rules for licensing, regardless of prior licensure elsewhere. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the specific regulations of the jurisdiction, Ontario in this case. They should then assess the individual's situation against these regulations, identify the legally compliant path forward, and clearly communicate this path to the individual. This involves prioritizing legal compliance and public safety over expediency. Question 3. The assessment process reveals that a candidate driver in Dublin, when approaching a junction, hesitates significantly before a no entry sign, eventually proceeding into the junction after a noticeable delay. Which of the following best describes the assessor's professional responsibility in this situation? Option A. Overlook the hesitation as a minor lapse in concentration, assuming the driver eventually understood the sign, given that no immediate danger or collision occurred. Option B. Focus solely on the driver's ability to control the vehicle's speed and steering, deeming the interpretation of signage secondary if no immediate hazard is created. Option C. Accurately identify the driver's failure to correctly interpret and comply with the mandatory no entry sign as a significant error, documenting it as a failure to adhere to traffic regulations. Option D. Consider the error minor and not a cause for failure, as the driver ultimately proceeded into the junction without incident, indicating a degree of situational awareness. The correct answer is C. Accurately identify the driver's failure to correctly interpret and comply with the mandatory no entry sign as a significant error, documenting it as a failure to adhere to traffic regulations. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a common challenge for new drivers in Dublin, understanding the nuances of road signage and their legal implications. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the assessor to evaluate not just rote memorization of signs, but the driver's ability to interpret and apply their meaning in real-time traffic situations, ensuring public safety. A driver's misinterpretation can lead to dangerous maneuvers, contraventions of the road traffic acts, and potential accidents. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between minor hesitations and fundamental misunderstandings that compromise safety. The correct approach involves the assessor accurately identifying the driver's failure to correctly interpret a mandatory sign and documenting this as a significant error. This is correct because the Road Traffic Acts in Ireland mandate adherence to all traffic signs. A failure to understand and comply with a mandatory sign, such as a no-entry sign, directly contravenes these regulations and demonstrates a lack of competence to drive safely. The assessor's duty is to ensure the driver possesses the necessary knowledge and judgment to operate a vehicle in accordance with Irish law and to protect other road users. An incorrect approach would be to overlook the driver's hesitation or to assume they understood the sign after a brief pause, especially if no immediate danger occurred. This is ethically and regulatorily flawed because it fails to uphold the stringent safety standards required for licensing. It implicitly condones a potentially unsafe practice and misrepresents the driver's actual competency. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the error as minor, even if it involved a mandatory sign, on the basis that no accident happened. This is problematic as it ignores the proactive nature of road safety. The purpose of the test is to prevent potential dangers, not just react to them. Furthermore, failing to document such an error means the driver may not receive the necessary feedback to correct a critical deficiency, potentially leading to future contraventions. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and regulatory compliance. This involves a thorough observation of the driver's actions in relation to all traffic controls, a clear understanding of the legal requirements associated with each sign, and objective documentation of any deviations. When a driver encounters a mandatory sign, the professional must assess whether the driver correctly identified its meaning and acted accordingly. If there is any doubt or incorrect action, it must be recorded as a failure, regardless of immediate consequences, to ensure only competent and law-abiding drivers are licensed. Question 4. The evaluation methodology shows that when assessing a candidate's readiness to drive in Dublin, Ireland, what is the most effective approach to evaluating their ability to anticipate and respond to unpredictable road user behavior? Option A. Focusing primarily on the speed at which the driver completes maneuvers, assuming that efficiency indicates competence. Option B. Observing the driver's ability to scan the environment, identify potential hazards, and demonstrate a proactive, defensive driving style in response to changing traffic conditions. Option C. Assessing only the immediate outcome of a driving action, such as braking or steering, without considering the driver's awareness or anticipation leading up to the action. Option D. Strictly penalizing any deviation from the ideal driving line, regardless of whether safety is compromised. The correct answer is B. Observing the driver's ability to scan the environment, identify potential hazards, and demonstrate a proactive, defensive driving style in response to changing traffic conditions. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that assessing a driver's ability to navigate Dublin's complex urban environment requires a nuanced approach that goes beyond simply testing adherence to traffic laws. This scenario is professionally challenging because it demands the examiner to balance objective assessment of driving skills with the subjective interpretation of a driver's decision-making in unpredictable situations, all within the specific context of Irish road conditions and regulations. The examiner must consider not only the immediate action taken, but also the underlying reasoning and potential consequences. The best approach involves a comprehensive assessment of the driver's ability to anticipate potential hazards and react appropriately, demonstrating a proactive and defensive driving style. This includes evaluating their awareness of other road users, pedestrians, cyclists, other vehicles, their understanding of road signage and markings specific to Dublin, and their judgment in situations like merging traffic or navigating narrow streets. The justification for this approach lies in the Road Safety Authority, RSA guidelines for driver testing in Ireland, which emphasize the importance of safe driving practices, hazard perception, and the ability to drive independently and safely in all traffic conditions. This aligns with the ultimate goal of the test, to ensure drivers are competent and safe on Irish roads. An approach that focuses solely on the immediate outcome of a maneuver, without considering the driver's awareness or anticipation, is professionally unacceptable. For instance, if a driver brakes sharply but does so because they were not scanning the road ahead and only reacted at the last second, this indicates a failure in hazard perception, which is a critical component of safe driving. This would be a regulatory failure, as it overlooks a key aspect of the RSA's assessment criteria. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to penalize a driver for minor deviations from an ideal line if those deviations do not compromise safety or traffic flow. The test is not about perfection in steering, but about safe and effective control of the vehicle. Overly strict adherence to an idealized path, without considering the dynamic nature of real-world driving in Dublin, can lead to an unfair assessment and fail to identify a driver's ability to adapt. This would be an ethical failure, as it deviates from the principle of fair and objective assessment. Furthermore, an approach that prioritizes speed of completion over safe execution of maneuvers is also unacceptable. Dublin's roads often require drivers to proceed with caution, especially in areas with heavy pedestrian traffic or complex junctions. Rushing through these situations, even if technically correct, can indicate a lack of judgment and an increased risk of an incident. This would be a regulatory failure, as it contradicts the RSA's emphasis on safe driving practices. The professional reasoning framework for examiners should involve a continuous assessment of the driver's overall competence, focusing on hazard perception, anticipation, and safe decision-making throughout the test. Examiners should consider the context of each situation, the driver's actions and reactions, and the potential risks involved. They should be trained to identify underlying skill deficits rather than just surface-level errors. The decision-making process should be guided by the RSA's official test standards and a commitment to ensuring public safety on Irish roads. Question 5. Analysis of a client's financial situation in Ontario reveals that they wish to invest a significant portion of their retirement savings into a high-risk, speculative venture that is not a recognized investment product under Ontario securities regulations. The client insists this is their sole desire and that they understand the risks involved. What is the most appropriate course of action for the financial advisor? Option A. Conduct a thorough assessment of the client's overall financial situation, risk tolerance, and long-term objectives. Educate the client on the regulatory limitations and inherent risks of their proposed investment, and explore alternative, suitable investment strategies that align with their goals and regulatory compliance. Option B. Inform the client that the proposed investment is not permissible under Ontario securities regulations and refuse to proceed without offering any further guidance or alternatives. Option C. Proceed with executing the client's requested investment, as their instructions are clear and they claim to understand the risks, thereby fulfilling their immediate request. Option D. Recommend a slightly less risky, but still speculative investment product that is available through the advisor's firm, even if it doesn't fully align with the client's original intent. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough assessment of the client's overall financial situation, risk tolerance, and long-term objectives. Educate the client on the regulatory limitations and inherent risks of their proposed investment, and explore alternative, suitable investment strategies that align with their goals and regulatory compliance. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated desire and the advisor's fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest, particularly when the client's request could lead to a suboptimal outcome or potential regulatory breach. The advisor must navigate this by prioritizing client welfare and regulatory compliance over simply fulfilling a request that might be ill-advised. The specific context of Ontario's regulatory framework for financial advice adds a layer of complexity, requiring adherence to provincial securities legislation and the rules of self-regulatory organizations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough assessment of the client's stated objective and the underlying reasons for it. This approach prioritizes understanding the client's true needs and financial situation before recommending or implementing any strategy. It involves educating the client about the risks and benefits of their proposed course of action, exploring alternative solutions that better align with their long-term financial well-being and regulatory requirements, and documenting the entire process, including the client's informed decision. This aligns with the principles of client-centric advice mandated by Ontario securities law and the ethical codes of conduct for financial professionals, which emphasize suitability, best interest, and transparency. Incorrect approaches analysis, recommending a strategy that directly facilitates the client's stated, but potentially detrimental, objective without further investigation, is professionally unacceptable. This approach fails to uphold the advisor's duty to act in the client's best interest and could lead to a recommendation that is not suitable, violating regulatory obligations. Another unacceptable approach is to refuse the client's request outright without providing any explanation or alternative solutions. This demonstrates a lack of client engagement and fails to fulfill the advisor's role in guiding the client towards sound financial decisions. Finally, proceeding with the client's request solely based on their insistence, without adequately documenting the risks and the client's understanding, exposes both the client and the advisor to significant risk and potential regulatory sanctions for failing to conduct proper due diligence and ensure suitability. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making process that begins with active listening and a deep understanding of the client's stated goals. This should be followed by a comprehensive assessment of the client's financial situation, risk tolerance, and objectives. The advisor must then analyze the suitability of the client's proposed course of action against regulatory requirements and ethical standards. If the proposed action is not suitable or poses undue risk, the advisor must clearly communicate these concerns to the client, explain the rationale, and propose alternative, more appropriate strategies. The entire interaction, including discussions, recommendations, and the client's final decision, must be meticulously documented to demonstrate compliance and protect both parties. Question 6. The review process indicates that a driver applicant in Dublin, Ireland, has a history of 3 minor speeding tickets issued within the last 2 years. Which of the following approaches best reflects the professional and regulatory requirements for assessing this applicant's eligibility for a driving license? Option A. Base the decision on anecdotal information from other drivers regarding the applicant's perceived driving habits. Option B. Grant the driving license application without further investigation, assuming minor speeding tickets do not pose a significant risk. Option C. Immediately deny the driving license application due to the presence of any recorded traffic violations. Option D. Conduct a detailed review of the applicant's entire driving record, considering the nature, recency, and frequency of the infractions, and any evidence of remedial action or improved driving behavior. The correct answer is D. Conduct a detailed review of the applicant's entire driving record, considering the nature, recency, and frequency of the infractions, and any evidence of remedial action or improved driving behavior. Explanation. The review process indicates that a driver applicant in Dublin, Ireland, has a history of minor traffic infractions. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the applicant's right to obtain a driving license with the paramount importance of public safety on Irish roads. A careful judgment is needed to assess whether past behavior poses an unacceptable risk. The best professional practice involves a thorough, individualized assessment of the applicant's driving record. This approach prioritizes a comprehensive review of the nature, recency, and frequency of the infractions, considering any mitigating circumstances or evidence of rehabilitation. This aligns with the principles of fairness and due diligence expected by the Road Safety Authority, RSA, of Ireland, which mandates that licensing decisions are based on an applicant's fitness and ability to drive safely, rather than solely on a blanket exclusion for past minor offenses. The focus is on current risk assessment. An approach that immediately denies the license based solely on the existence of any past infractions, regardless of their severity or age, is professionally unacceptable. This fails to consider the RSA's guidelines, which allow for discretion and individual assessment, potentially leading to an unfair outcome and failing to uphold the principle of proportionality. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to grant the license without any further scrutiny, assuming that minor infractions do not indicate a pattern of dangerous driving. This overlooks the potential for a cumulative risk and fails to adequately protect public safety, which is a core ethical and regulatory responsibility. Finally, an approach that relies on hearsay or unsubstantiated claims about the applicant's driving habits, rather than documented evidence from their driving record, is also professionally unacceptable. This introduces an element of bias and unreliability into the decision-making process, undermining the integrity of the licensing system. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the specific regulatory requirements of the RSA regarding driver licensing and the assessment of driving records. This framework should then involve gathering all relevant, verifiable information about the applicant's history, critically evaluating this information in the context of public safety and making a reasoned decision based on established criteria and principles of fairness. Question 7. Performance analysis shows a driver approaching a pedestrian crossing in Dublin, Ireland, where a pedestrian is standing at the edge of the pavement, looking away from the road. What is the most professionally responsible course of action for the driver to take? Option A. Slow down significantly, prepare to stop, and attempt to make eye contact with the pedestrian to confirm their awareness of the vehicle. Option B. Maintain current speed and assume the pedestrian will notice the vehicle and move out of the way. Option C. Sound the horn loudly to alert the pedestrian and encourage them to move quickly. Option D. Swerve sharply to the side to avoid the pedestrian without reducing speed. The correct answer is A. Slow down significantly, prepare to stop, and attempt to make eye contact with the pedestrian to confirm their awareness of the vehicle. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a driver to make a split-second decision under pressure, balancing adherence to traffic laws with the immediate safety of others. The presence of a pedestrian, even if seemingly unaware, introduces a significant risk that necessitates proactive and defensive driving. The driver must interpret the pedestrian's behavior and the surrounding environment to determine the safest course of action, all while operating a vehicle within the legal framework of Dublin, Ireland. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves prioritizing the safety of vulnerable road users. This approach involves slowing down significantly, preparing to stop if necessary, and making eye contact with the pedestrian to confirm their awareness of the vehicle. This is correct because it aligns with the fundamental principles of road safety enshrined in Irish road traffic legislation, which places a strong emphasis on the duty of care owed by drivers to pedestrians and other road users. Specifically, the Road Traffic Act 2010 and associated regulations promote a defensive driving style that anticipates potential hazards. This proactive measure minimizes the risk of collision and demonstrates responsible vehicle operation. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves maintaining speed and assuming the pedestrian will move. This is professionally unacceptable, as it disregards the potential for misjudgment or unexpected actions by the pedestrian, creating a high risk of an accident. It fails to meet the duty of care required by Irish law, which mandates drivers to take all reasonable steps to avoid a collision. Another incorrect approach is to honk the horn aggressively to startle the pedestrian into moving. Intended to alert, this can cause panic and unpredictable reactions, potentially leading to the pedestrian stepping into the path of the vehicle. This method is not a substitute for safe, controlled deceleration, and fails to demonstrate the required level of caution and consideration for the pedestrian's safety as expected under Irish road traffic regulations. A further incorrect approach is to swerve sharply to avoid the pedestrian without first slowing down. This maneuver could lead to loss of control of the vehicle, endangering not only the pedestrian, but also other road users and the driver themselves. It demonstrates a failure to assess the situation calmly and react in a controlled manner, which is a core expectation of competent driving under Irish law. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and legal compliance. This involves 1. Hazard perception, actively scanning the environment for potential risks, such as pedestrians near the roadway. 2. Risk assessment, evaluating the likelihood and severity of a potential collision based on the observed hazard. 3. Defensive action, taking immediate, appropriate steps to mitigate the identified risk, such as reducing speed and preparing to stop. 4. Confirmation, ensuring the hazard has been neutralized or the risk averted before resuming normal driving. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are made with the utmost consideration for safety and adherence to legal obligations. Question 8. Compliance review shows an applicant for a Dublin taxi license has extensive experience driving commercially in other European cities. What is the most appropriate method to assess their suitability for a Dublin taxi license under Irish regulations? Option A. A simple confirmation that they possess a standard Irish driving license. Option B. A brief interview focusing on their general driving history and any past traffic violations. Option C. A comprehensive examination covering Dublin taxi licensing conditions, passenger rights, fare regulations, and NTA-specific operational guidelines, presented through scenario-based questions. Option D. A review of their existing commercial driving permits from other European countries, assuming equivalent standards. The correct answer is C. A comprehensive examination covering Dublin taxi licensing conditions, passenger rights, fare regulations, and NTA-specific operational guidelines, presented through scenario-based questions. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a driver applying for a Dublin taxi license. The core issue is ensuring the applicant's understanding and adherence to the specific regulations governing taxi services in Dublin, Ireland, particularly concerning passenger safety and service standards, as mandated by the National Transport Authority, NTA. The challenge lies in assessing not just theoretical knowledge, but also the practical application of these rules in real-world scenarios, which is crucial for public trust and safety. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves a comprehensive assessment that directly probes the applicant's knowledge of the Dublin taxi regulations and their ability to apply them to common operational situations. This includes understanding the specific requirements for vehicle condition, driver conduct, fare calculation transparency, and passenger rights as outlined by the NTA. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the NTA's mandate to ensure licensed taxi drivers are competent, knowledgeable, and committed to upholding the highest standards of public service and safety within the Dublin area. It moves beyond simple recall to assess practical understanding, which is essential for safe and lawful operation. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the applicant's general driving experience without verifying their specific knowledge of Dublin's taxi regulations. This is professionally unacceptable because extensive general driving experience does not guarantee familiarity with the unique legal and operational requirements for taxi services in Dublin, potentially leading to breaches of NTA regulations and compromising passenger safety. Another incorrect approach would be to rely entirely on a written test that only covers basic traffic laws. While a foundational understanding of traffic laws is necessary, it is insufficient for a taxi driver. This approach fails to assess the applicant's knowledge of specific Dublin taxi licensing conditions, fare structures, passenger rights, and NTA-specific operational guidelines, which are critical for compliant service delivery. A third incorrect approach would be to assume that because the applicant holds a standard driving license, they automatically meet the standards for a taxi license. This is a significant regulatory failure. The taxi licensing process, overseen by the NTA, involves a distinct set of requirements and assessments designed to ensure a higher level of competence, knowledge, and suitability for public transport services than a standard driving license confers. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should adopt a structured and comprehensive assessment framework. This framework should prioritize verifying knowledge of the specific regulatory body's requirements, in this case, the NTA for Dublin taxis. The assessment should include a mix of theoretical questions about regulations and practical scenarios to gauge application. Professionals must always consider the primary objective of licensing: public safety and service quality. Any assessment that deviates from directly measuring compliance with these specific regulatory mandates is a failure of professional duty. Question 9. Investigation of a client's request to immediately liquidate a significant portion of their investment portfolio in Ontario, Canada, to fund an unexpected personal expense requires careful consideration of the advisor's responsibilities. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the regulatory framework and professional ethics governing financial advice in Ontario? Option A. Immediately proceed with the liquidation as requested by the client to demonstrate responsiveness and accommodate their urgent need. Option B. Refuse to discuss the liquidation further, stating that the client's decision is not in their best interest without providing detailed explanations or alternatives. Option C. Persuade the client to maintain their current investments by emphasizing only the potential for future market gains and the risks of missing out on growth. Option D. Conduct a thorough assessment of the client's overall financial situation, risk tolerance, and long-term objectives, while clearly explaining the potential tax implications, loss of future growth, and impact on their financial plan if they proceed with the liquidation, before making any recommendations. The correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough assessment of the client's overall financial situation, risk tolerance, and long-term objectives, while clearly explaining the potential tax implications, loss of future growth, and impact on their financial plan if they proceed with the liquidation, before making any recommendations. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's immediate desire and the regulatory obligations of a financial advisor. The advisor must navigate the client's emotional state and potential lack of understanding regarding the long-term implications of their request, while strictly adhering to the regulatory framework governing investment advice in Ontario, Canada. The core of the challenge lies in balancing client service with fiduciary duties and regulatory compliance. The best approach involves a thorough assessment of the client's financial situation, objectives, and risk tolerance, coupled with a clear explanation of the implications of their proposed action. This aligns with the Ontario Securities Commission OSC Rule 31-505 Conditions of Registration, which mandates that registrants must act in the best interest of their clients. This includes understanding the client's circumstances and providing advice that is suitable. The advisor must explain the potential negative consequences of liquidating investments prematurely, such as tax implications, loss of potential future growth, and the impact on long-term financial goals, without being dismissive of the client's concerns. This approach prioritizes informed decision-making by the client, supported by professional guidance. An incorrect approach would be to immediately proceed with the liquidation without further inquiry. This fails to meet the best interest of the client standard under OSC Rule 31-505, as it bypasses the crucial step of understanding the client's full financial picture and the suitability of such a drastic action. It also risks violating the advisor's duty of care, as it assumes the client's request is inherently sound without due diligence. Another incorrect approach would be to refuse to discuss the liquidation outright, citing only a vague concern about the client's decision. While caution is warranted, outright refusal without explanation or offering alternative solutions can be perceived as unhelpful and may damage the client relationship. It doesn't fulfill the advisor's role in guiding the client through complex financial decisions, even if the ultimate decision rests with the client. Finally, an approach that involves pressuring the client to keep their investments by focusing solely on potential future gains, while ignoring their immediate need or concern, is also professionally unsound. This can be seen as a failure to acknowledge the client's current circumstances, and may not be in their best interest if there are legitimate reasons for their desire to liquidate. It also risks violating the spirit of client-centric advice. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with active listening to understand the client's stated need. This is followed by a comprehensive fact-finding process to gather all relevant information about their financial situation, goals, and risk tolerance. Next, the advisor should analyze the implications of the client's request in light of this information and applicable regulation. Finally, the advisor should clearly communicate the findings, potential consequences, and suitable alternatives to the client, empowering them to make an informed decision. Question 10. Comparative studies suggest that when estimating the total fuel cost for a Dublin driving test route, a driving instructor must account for various factors. If a standard Dublin driving test route is approximately 25 kilometers long, and the average fuel consumption for a typical driving school vehicle in Dublin is 7.5 liters per 100 kilometers, with the current average price of petrol in Ireland being Euros 1.85 per litre, what is the estimated fuel cost for completing the driving test route? Option A, Euros 3.75. Option B, Euros 3.47. Option C, Euros 4.00. Option D, Euros 3.00. The correct answer is B, Euros 3.47. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent variability in fuel consumption and the need to provide accurate cost estimates to clients while adhering to regulatory requirements for transparency and fairness in pricing. The Dublin driver's test context implies a need for practical, real-world estimations that drivers can rely on. Core of the challenge lies in balancing the precision of mathematical calculation with the unpredictability of external factors. The best approach involves calculating the estimated fuel cost based on the average fuel consumption of a typical vehicle used for driving lessons in Dublin, the current average fuel price in Ireland, and the total distance of the test route. This method is correct because it uses verifiable data points, average consumption, current prices, route distance, to create a reasonable and defensible estimate. It aligns with principles of professional integrity and client communication by providing a transparent and data-driven projection. The regulatory framework for service providers in Ireland generally mandates clear and accurate pricing information, and this approach directly supports that. An incorrect approach would be to simply state a round figure without any underlying calculation, as this lacks transparency and could be perceived as arbitrary or misleading. This fails to meet the expectation of providing a reasoned estimate and could violate consumer protection guidelines that require clear and justifiable pricing. Another incorrect approach would be to use a highly variable or outdated fuel price, or an unrealistic average fuel consumption figure. This would lead to an inaccurate estimate, potentially causing financial discrepancies for the client and damaging the professional's reputation. It demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to provide a service based on current, relevant information. A further incorrect approach would be to base the estimate solely on the driver's personal vehicle's fuel efficiency, which may not be representative of the vehicles typically used for driving lessons or the general driving conditions encountered on the test routes. This introduces an unverified personal bias into the calculation, undermining the objectivity required for a professional estimate. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Identifying all relevant variables, route distance, average vehicle consumption, current fuel prices. 2. Sourcing reliable data for each variable. 3. Applying appropriate mathematical formulas to derive an estimate. 4. Clearly communicating the assumptions and methodology used to the client, allowing for adjustments if specific circumstances warrant. Question 11. The investigation demonstrates that Mr. Henderson has been issued a Dublin Bus EIRN driver's license. To ensure ongoing compliance with Irish road traffic regulations and Bus EIRN's operational standards, what is the most appropriate method for verifying Mr. Henderson's continued eligibility to drive a commercial passenger vehicle? Option A. Accept Mr. Henderson's verbal assurance that his driving license remains valid and free of any disqualifying endorsements. Option B. Conduct a full license verification only if a specific incident or complaint related to Mr. Henderson's driving occurs. Option C. Implement a regular documented process to verify the validity of Mr. Henderson's driving license and any endorsements or restrictions through official channels, such as cross-referencing with the National Driver License Service, NDLS, records. Option D. Assume that the driving license issued at the time of hiring remains valid for the duration of his employment without any further checks. The correct answer is C. Implement a regular documented process to verify the validity of Mr. Henderson's driving license and any endorsements or restrictions through official channels, such as cross-referencing with the National Driver License Service, NDLS, records. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a scenario where driver Mr. Henderson has been issued a Dublin Bus EIRN driver's license. The challenge lies in ensuring that Mr. Henderson's ongoing adherence to the specific road traffic regulations and licensing conditions applicable in Ireland, particularly those pertaining to commercial passenger transport, is continuously monitored and validated. This requires a proactive approach to compliance rather than a reactive one. The best professional practice involves a systematic and documented process for verifying the continued validity of Mr. Henderson's driving license and any associated endorsements or restrictions that might impact his ability to operate a commercial passenger vehicle for Dublin Bus EIRN. This includes regularly cross-referencing his license status with the official records maintained by the National Driver License Service, NDLS, in Ireland. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the regulatory requirements set forth by the road traffic, licensing and registration, regulations, and the conditions stipulated by Bus EIRN's own operational policies, which mandate that all drivers must possess and maintain a valid license appropriate for their duties. Ethical considerations also demand that the safety of the public is paramount, and this proactive verification ensures that only qualified and legally permitted individuals are operating passenger vehicles. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on Mr. Henderson's self-declaration of his license status without independent verification. This fails to meet the regulatory obligation for employers to ensure driver compliance and introduces significant risk. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of due diligence in safeguarding public safety. Another incorrect approach would be to only conduct checks when a specific incident or complaint arises. This reactive stance is insufficient, as it allows for potential periods of noncompliance to go undetected, thereby contravening the spirit and letter of the regulations that require ongoing fitness to drive. Finally, assuming that a license issued at the commencement of employment remains valid indefinitely without periodic checks is a critical oversight. This ignores the dynamic nature of driving licenses, which can be suspended, revoked, or have conditions added due to various factors, and thus fails to uphold the employer's responsibility for continuous compliance. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes proactive risk management and regulatory adherence. This involves establishing clear internal procedures for license verification, setting regular review intervals, and utilizing available official channels for confirmation. The framework should emphasize the employer's ultimate responsibility for ensuring driver compliance with all relevant Irish road traffic laws and licensing conditions. Question 12. Assessment of an applicant for a Dublin taxi driver license in Ireland who has a prior conviction for drunk driving and a recent fixed penalty notice for speeding. How should they best present their driving history to the National Transport Authority? Option A. Assume the National Transport Authority will discover the speeding notice through background checks and therefore does not need to be proactively disclosed. Option B. Disclose both the drunk driving conviction and the speeding fixed penalty notice, providing all relevant documentation for both. Option C. Disclose only the drunk driving conviction, assuming the speeding notice is too minor to be relevant. Option D. Disclose the drunk driving conviction and mention the speeding notice verbally during an interview, without providing documentation. The correct answer is B. Disclose both the drunk driving conviction and the speeding fixed penalty notice, providing all relevant documentation for both. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a driver applying for a Dublin taxi license. The challenge lies in navigating the specific licensing requirements of the National Transport Authority, NTA, in Ireland, particularly concerning the applicant's prior driving record and the interpretation of serious offense, as defined by Irish transport legislation. The applicant must accurately present their history to ensure compliance and avoid potential disqualification. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves the applicant proactively and truthfully disclosing all convictions, including the fixed penalty notice for speeding, and providing the accompanying documentation. This aligns with the NTA's stated requirement for applicants to declare all convictions, regardless of severity, and to provide supporting evidence. The NTA's guidelines on taxi licensing in Ireland emphasize transparency and the thorough assessment of an applicant's suitability, which includes their driving history. By disclosing everything and providing context, the applicant demonstrates honesty and allows the NTA to make an informed decision based on the full picture, adhering to the spirit and letter of the taxi licensing regulations in Ireland. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to only disclose the more serious conviction and omit the fixed penalty notice for speeding. This is problematic because the NTA's application process typically requires a comprehensive declaration of all driving offenses. While a fixed penalty notice might seem minor, it is still a record of an offense. Failing to disclose it could be interpreted as an attempt to mislead the authority, potentially leading to disqualification or future licensing issues under Irish transport law. Another incorrect approach is to assume that a fixed penalty notice is not considered a conviction for licensing purposes and therefore not reportable. This is a dangerous assumption, as the NTA's definition of what constitutes a reportable offense for taxi licensing purposes may be broader than a standard criminal conviction. The onus is on the applicant to err on the side of caution and disclose all relevant information, rather than making assumptions about what the NTA deems significant. A further incorrect approach is to wait for the NTA to discover the fixed penalty notice through background checks. This passive approach is risky. If the NTA's checks reveal the undisclosed offense, it could be viewed as a deliberate omission, undermining the applicant's credibility and potentially leading to a negative outcome, even if the offense itself would not have been grounds for disqualification if disclosed upfront. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should adopt a principle of full and frank disclosure. When applying for licenses or permits, especially in regulated industries like taxi services in Dublin, it is crucial to understand the specific requirements of the governing body, in this case, the NTA. Applicants should meticulously review application forms and accompanying guidelines. If there is any ambiguity about whether an offense needs to be disclosed, the professional decision-making process dictates erring on the side of transparency. This involves gathering all relevant documentation and presenting it proactively, allowing the regulatory body to assess the situation comprehensively. This approach fosters trust and demonstrates a commitment to regulatory compliance, which is paramount for professional standing and successful licensing. Question 13. The audit findings indicate that a vehicle's license plate in Ontario was found to be loose and partially obscured by mud during a routine inspection. What is the most appropriate immediate action for the driver to take? Option A. Ignore the condition of the license plate, as long as the vehicle is otherwise operational and the driver has the necessary documentation. Option B. Continue driving to the destination and address the loose and obscured license plate upon arrival, assuming it is a minor issue. Option C. Attempt to temporarily secure the license plate with a piece of tape or string, believing this will suffice until a proper repair can be made later. Option D. Immediately stop the vehicle in a safe location and securely reattach the license plate so it is clearly visible, ensuring it meets the requirements of the Ontario Highway Traffic Act. Correct answer is D. Immediately stop the vehicle in a safe location and securely reattach the license plate so it is clearly visible, ensuring it meets the requirements of the Ontario Highway Traffic Act. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential lapse in adherence to the Ontario Highway Traffic Act, HTA, regarding the proper display of vehicle identification. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the driver to balance immediate operational needs with legal compliance, potentially under time pressure. A driver's responsibility extends beyond simply operating a vehicle. It includes ensuring the vehicle meets all statutory requirements for roadworthiness and identification. Misinterpreting or neglecting these requirements can lead to penalties for the driver and the vehicle owner, and more importantly, can compromise the integrity of vehicle identification, which is crucial for law enforcement and public safety. Careful judgment is required to assess the situation and determine the most appropriate course of action that upholds both operational efficiency and legal obligations. The correct approach involves immediately rectifying the situation by ensuring the license plate is securely attached and clearly visible as per the Ontario HTA. This directly addresses the identified deficiency and brings the vehicle into compliance. The HTA, specifically sections pertaining to license plates and their display, mandates that license plates must be kept clean and in a condition that allows them to be legible. Furthermore, it requires that the plate be securely fastened to the vehicle in a position that is plainly visible. By taking immediate steps to reattach and ensure the visibility of the license plate, the driver is fulfilling their legal obligation under the HTA, preventing potential infractions, and upholding the principles of responsible vehicle operation. An incorrect approach would be to continue driving with a loose or obscured license plate, even if the driver intends to fix it later. This constitutes a violation of the HTA as the plate is not being displayed in a manner that is plainly visible and securely fastened. Another incorrect approach is to assume that the issue is minor and can be ignored until a more convenient time, such as after completing the current trip. This demonstrates a disregard for the legal requirements of the HTA and exposes the driver and owner to potential penalties. Finally, attempting to temporarily secure the plate with inadequate materials that do not ensure it remains visible and securely fastened also fails to meet the HTA's requirements and could lead to the plate becoming detached again, perpetuating the violation. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes immediate compliance with relevant legislation. This involves 1. Identifying the specific legal requirement, in this case, HTA regulations on license plate display. 2. Assessing the current situation against that requirement. 3. Taking immediate corrective action to achieve compliance. 4. Documenting the action taken if necessary. This proactive approach ensures that legal obligations are met without delay, mitigating risks and demonstrating a commitment to responsible conduct. Question 14. Regulatory review indicates that a prospective taxi driver in Dublin is preparing to submit their application to the National Transport Authority, NTA. They have a vehicle they believe is suitable and have gathered most of their personal documentation. What is the most prudent course of action to ensure their application meets the NTA's stringent Dublin taxi licensing requirements? Option A. Rely on advice from experienced taxi drivers in Dublin and online forums to determine vehicle suitability and application completeness. Option B. Assume the vehicle is compliant because it was previously used by another licensed taxi driver in Dublin. Option C. Submit the application with a note indicating that some driver documentation, like Garda vetting, is pending and will be provided shortly. Option D. Thoroughly review the National Transport Authority's official guidelines for taxi driver licensing in Dublin, meticulously checking vehicle specifications and driver documentation against current NTA standards. The correct answer is D. Thoroughly review the National Transport Authority's official guidelines for taxi driver licensing in Dublin, meticulously checking vehicle specifications and driver documentation against current NTA standards. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a driver applying for Dublin taxi license. The challenge lies in navigating the specific licensing requirements of the National Transport Authority, NTA, in Ireland, particularly concerning the Dublin taxi driver application process, which has detailed criteria for vehicle suitability and driver qualifications. Misinterpreting or failing to adhere to these specific NTA guidelines can lead to a rejected application, wasted time and resources, and potential reputational damage. Careful judgment is required to ensure all documentation and vehicle specifications precisely align with the NTA's current regulations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough review of the National Transport Authority's official guidelines for taxi driver licensing in Dublin. This includes meticulously checking the vehicle specifications outlined in the NTA's Dublin taxi driver application documentation, ensuring the proposed vehicle meets all criteria for age, emissions, accessibility, and passenger capacity. Furthermore, verifying that all required driver documentation, such as the Garda vetting and the driver's license, is up to date and compliant with NTA standards is crucial. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the regulatory framework established by the NTA, which is the sole authority governing taxi licensing in Dublin. Adhering strictly to these published requirements ensures the application is processed efficiently and without unnecessary delays or rejections, demonstrating professional diligence and respect for the regulatory process. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to rely solely on anecdotal advice from other taxi drivers or online forums regarding vehicle suitability. This is professionally unacceptable because such information may be outdated, inaccurate, or not specific to the applicant's situation or the NTA's current regulations. The NTA's guidelines are the definitive source, and deviations based on informal advice can lead to significant compliance issues. Another incorrect approach is to assume that a vehicle previously used by another licensed taxi driver in Dublin will automatically be approved. While it might have been compliant at one time, NTA regulations regarding vehicle age, emissions, and other specifications can change. Without independently verifying the current compliance of the specific vehicle against the latest NTA standards, the applicant risks submitting an unsuitable vehicle. A further incorrect approach is to submit an application with incomplete or outdated driver documentation, such as an expired Garda vetting certificate, hoping it will be overlooked or can be rectified later. This is professionally unsound, as the NTA requires all documentation to be current and complete at the time of application submission. Such omissions will likely result in an immediate rejection and require the applicant to restart the application process. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic and evidence-based approach to regulatory compliance. This involves identifying the relevant regulatory body, in this case, the NTA, locating and thoroughly understanding their official guidelines and application procedures, and cross-referencing all personal and vehicle details against these requirements. When in doubt, direct communication with the regulatory authority or seeking advice from a professional familiar with NTA licensing procedures is advisable. The decision-making process should prioritize accuracy, completeness, and adherence to the letter of the law and regulations. Question 15. Consider a scenario where a learner driver is undertaking their driving test in Dublin, Ireland, and approaches a junction with a traffic light that is about to turn red. They are also aware of a bus lane to their left which is currently in operation. Which of the following approaches best demonstrates compliance with Irish road law and the requirements of the Dublin driver's test? Option A. Stop abruptly before the junction, even if it means causing a minor obstruction to traffic behind, to avoid any risk of entering on red. Option B. Proceed through the junction cautiously if there is no immediate danger, ensuring to avoid the bus lane and be prepared to stop if necessary. Option C. Enter the bus lane to gain a better position to proceed through the junction, assuming it is permissible if the traffic light is still green. Option D. Accelerate to try and pass through the junction before the light turns red, while maintaining a safe distance from the bus lane. The correct answer is B. Proceed through the junction cautiously if there is no immediate danger, ensuring to avoid the bus lane and be prepared to stop if necessary. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a driver to navigate a complex urban environment with specific traffic regulations unique to Dublin, Ireland. The driver must not only demonstrate proficiency in operating a vehicle, but also a thorough understanding of local road signs, traffic light sequences, pedestrian interactions, and the specific rules governing public transport lanes, all within the context of Irish road law. Failure to adhere to these regulations can result in immediate failure of the test, potential road safety hazards, and a lack of confidence in the driver's ability to operate safely on Dublin's roads. Careful judgment is required to interpret and apply these rules in real-time driving situations. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves a comprehensive understanding and application of the rules of the road as published by the Road Safety Authority, RSA of Ireland, specifically focusing on sections pertaining to urban driving, priority rules, and the correct interpretation of traffic signals and road markings within Dublin. This approach prioritizes safety, adherence to legal requirements, and demonstrating competence in navigating the specific challenges of Dublin's road network, such as bus lanes and tram crossings. The driver must actively observe and react to all road users and signage, demonstrating a proactive and defensive driving style consistent with RSA guidelines. This aligns with the core objective of the Dublin Driver's Test, which is to ensure drivers can operate a vehicle safely and legally in the specified environment. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to rely solely on general driving knowledge without specific attention to Dublin's unique traffic management systems, such as the precise rules for entering and exiting bus lanes or the specific signage related to pedestrian crossings in built-up areas. This fails to meet the specific requirements of the Dublin Driver's Test, which assesses knowledge of local regulations. Another incorrect approach would be to prioritize speed and efficiency over strict adherence to traffic laws, such as by attempting to beat a changing traffic light or by making assumptions about the intentions of other road users without clear visual confirmation. This demonstrates a disregard for safety and legal compliance, which are paramount in the RSA's assessment criteria. A further incorrect approach would be to exhibit uncertainty or hesitation when encountering common urban driving scenarios, such as merging into traffic or navigating a roundabout, without attempting to apply the correct procedures as outlined in the rules of the road. This suggests a lack of confidence and competence, which would lead to a failing grade. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach driver testing with a framework that emphasizes thorough preparation, understanding of specific jurisdictional requirements, and a commitment to safety and legal compliance. This involves studying the relevant official documentation, in this case, the RSA's rules of the road, practicing in the specific testing environment, and developing a systematic approach to observation, decision-making, and vehicle control. When faced with a test scenario, the professional driver should prioritize demonstrating adherence to all rules and regulations, maintaining a safe distance from other vehicles, and communicating their intentions clearly through the use of indicators and appropriate road positioning. The decision-making process should be guided by the principle of safety first, ensuring that all actions are predictable and lawful. Question 16. Upon reviewing the regulatory framework for financial advisors in Ontario, if a client expresses intentions to engage in activities that appear to be fraudulent or illegal, what is the most appropriate initial course of action for a registered financial advisor? Option A. Disregard the client's statements, assuming they are not serious or are hypothetical. Option B. Directly report the client's statements to the relevant law enforcement authorities without prior internal consultation. Option C. Confront the client directly to dissuade them from their stated intentions without involving the firm. Option D. Immediately consult with the firm's compliance department and potentially legal counsel to determine the appropriate steps. The correct answer is D. Immediately consult with the firm's compliance department and potentially legal counsel to determine the appropriate steps. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a financial advisor to balance client confidentiality with the potential need to disclose information that could prevent harm. The advisor must navigate the ethical imperative to protect client privacy against the duty to act in the best interests of others, especially when there's a risk of significant financial loss or fraud. The specific context of a client discussing potentially illegal activities adds a layer of complexity, demanding careful consideration of legal obligations and professional conduct standards in Ontario. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves seeking guidance from the firm's compliance department and potentially legal counsel before taking any action. This approach acknowledges the advisor's limited authority and expertise in determining legal obligations and the appropriate course of action when faced with potential illegal activity. It ensures that any disclosure or non-disclosure is made in accordance with Ontario securities regulations, the firm's internal policies, and relevant laws, thereby protecting both the client and the advisor from potential repercussions. This aligns with the principles of acting with integrity and due diligence expected of registered individuals in Ontario. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately report the client's statements to the authorities without consulting the firm. This bypasses internal compliance procedures and could lead to an improper or premature disclosure, potentially violating client confidentiality or acting outside the scope of the advisor's authority. Fails to leverage the firm's resources for proper assessment and guidance, risking disciplinary action or legal complications. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the client's statements, assuming they are mere speculation or hyperbole. This is professionally negligent. If the client's statements indicate potential illegal activity, the advisor has a duty to investigate further and seek appropriate guidance. Ignoring such information could make the advisor complicit or liable if harm occurs, and it violates the ethical obligation to act with diligence and care in all client dealings under Ontario's regulatory framework. A further incorrect approach is to confront the client directly and attempt to dissuade them from their stated intentions without involving the firm or legal counsel. While well-intentioned, this could escalate the situation, compromise the advisor's professional standing, or lead to the client taking further steps to conceal their activities. It also places the advisor in a position of making legal judgments they are not qualified to make. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such dilemmas should first assess the nature and severity of the potential issue. They should then consult their firm's internal policies and compliance department, as these entities are equipped to provide guidance on regulatory obligations and risk management. If necessary, seeking advice from legal counsel is crucial. This layered approach ensures that decisions are informed, compliant, and ethically sound, prioritizing the protection of all parties involved while adhering to the specific regulatory landscape of Ontario. Question 17. When evaluating the responsibility of a driver in Dublin who begins to feel suddenly unwell and dizzy while operating their vehicle, which course of action best aligns with the Road Traffic Act 1961 and professional driving ethics in Ireland? Option A. Attempt to drive home as quickly as possible, hoping the symptoms will pass before reaching the destination. Option B. Immediately pull over to a safe location. Assess the situation and, if necessary, contact for assistance rather than continuing to drive. Option C. Continue driving a short distance to reach home, believing personal comfort outweighs the minor risk. Option D. Drive cautiously and hope the feeling of unwellness subsides without any intervention. Correct answer is B. Immediately pull over to a safe location, assess the situation, and if necessary, contact for assistance rather than continuing to drive. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a driver to make a critical decision under pressure, balancing immediate personal needs with the strict legal requirements of operating a vehicle in Dublin. The driver's personal distress, feeling unwell, could impair judgment, making adherence to regulations more difficult. The core challenge lies in recognizing the legal implications of continuing to drive when unfit, even for a short distance, and understanding the hierarchy of responsibilities: personal well-being, versus public safety and legal compliance. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately ceasing to drive and seeking appropriate assistance. This approach prioritizes safety and legal compliance. In Ireland, the Road Traffic Act 1961, as amended, places a strong emphasis on ensuring a driver is in a fit condition to drive. Driving while feeling unwell, to the point where it could impair one's ability to control a vehicle safely, is a contravention of the duty of care owed to other road users and a potential breach of Section 49 of the Road Traffic Act 1961, which deals with dangerous driving. This approach involves pulling over safely, assessing the situation, and if necessary, contacting a support person or emergency services, rather than continuing to drive. Incorrect approach is analysis. Continuing to drive a short distance home despite feeling unwell is professionally unacceptable. This action directly contravenes the legal obligation to be in a fit condition to drive. It creates a significant risk to public safety, as impaired judgment or physical incapacitation while driving can lead to accidents. This approach fails to uphold the duty of care and potentially violates road traffic legislation. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to drive home quickly, believing the urgency outweighs the risk. This is a flawed judgment that prioritizes personal convenience over safety and legal obligations, ignoring the potential for a sudden deterioration of the driver's condition. Finally, continuing to drive and hoping the feeling of unwellness passes without incident is also professionally unsound. It demonstrates a disregard for potential risks and a failure to proactively manage a situation that could compromise road safety and legal compliance. Professional reasoning. Professionals in any role involving public safety, including driving, must adopt a proactive and risk-averse approach. When faced with a situation that could impair their ability to perform their duties safely and legally, the immediate priority should be to mitigate risk. This involves stopping, assessing, and seeking appropriate help. The decision-making framework should involve 1. Recognizing the potential hazard, feeling unwell. 2. Understanding the legal and ethical obligations, fit to drive, duty of care. 3. Evaluating the immediate risks of continuing the activity. 4. Taking immediate action to cease the activity if a risk is identified. 5. Seeking appropriate assistance or alternative solutions. Question 18. The analysis reveals that Mr. O'Malley, a resident of Dublin, is applying to renew his driver's license. He has recently been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, which is currently managed effectively through diet and exercise. Considering the requirements of the road traffic licensing of drivers, Regulations 2016, and associated NDLS guidelines, which of the following actions best represents Mr. O'Malley's professional responsibility in this situation? Option A. Inform the National Driver License Service, NDLS, of his diabetes diagnosis and provide a medical report from his general practitioner GP, confirming the condition is well managed and does not impair his driving ability. Option B. Obtain a medical report from a diabetes specialist and submit it directly to the NDLS without consulting his GP. Option C. Submit a self-declaration of his medical condition without any supporting medical documentation from a healthcare professional. Option D. Assume no disclosure is necessary as his diabetes is managed by diet and exercise, and proceed with the license renewal application without mentioning the condition. The correct answer is A. Inform the National Driver License Service, NDLS, of his diabetes diagnosis and provide a medical report from his general practitioner GP, confirming the condition is well managed and does not impair his driving ability. Explanation. The analysis reveals a scenario where a driver, Mr. O'Malley, is seeking to renew his Dublin driver's license. He has a recent diagnosis of type 2 diabetes, which is being managed with diet and exercise. The challenge lies in determining the appropriate disclosure and documentation requirements under Irish road traffic law and associated medical guidelines for drivers. This requires careful judgment to ensure compliance without imposing unnecessary burdens or compromising road safety. The correct approach involves proactive and transparent communication with the relevant authorities, supported by appropriate medical documentation. This means Mr. O'Malley should inform the National Driver License Service, NDLS, about his medical condition and provide a medical report from his general practitioner, GP, confirming his condition is well managed and does not impair his driving ability. This aligns with the principles of the road traffic licensing of drivers, Regulations 2016, and the NDLS medical guidelines, which mandate disclosure of medical conditions that could affect driving safety and require medical certification for certain conditions. The ethical imperative is to ensure public safety while facilitating continued driving for individuals whose conditions do not pose a risk. An incorrect approach would be to assume that because his diabetes is managed by diet and exercise, no disclosure is necessary. This fails to acknowledge the legal obligation to report any medical condition that could potentially affect driving. The Road Traffic Licensing of Drivers Regulations 2016 require drivers to notify the NDLS of any relevant medical condition. Failure to do so can lead to penalties and invalidation of the license. Another incorrect approach would be to only provide a self-declaration without any supporting medical evidence. While self-declaration is part of the process, for certain medical conditions like diabetes, the NDLS requires a medical report from a registered medical practitioner to verify the condition's stability and its impact on driving. Relying solely on a self-declaration would not satisfy the regulatory requirement for medical certification in such cases. A further incorrect approach would be to provide a medical report from a specialist who is not his treating GP, without the GP's endorsement or a clear indication that this specialist report is being submitted in lieu of the GP's assessment. While specialist input can be valuable, the primary point of contact for licensing purposes is typically the driver's GP, who has the overall view of the patient's health and ability to drive. The NDLS guidelines often specify the preferred source of medical information. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, compliance with specific regulatory requirements, and the safety of all road users. This involves understanding the specific disclosure obligations for medical conditions under Irish law, proactively seeking appropriate medical advice and documentation, and submitting all required information to the NDLS in a timely manner. When in doubt, consulting the official NDLS guidelines or seeking clarification from the NDLS directly is crucial. Question 19. The risk matrix shows a potential conflict of interest for a Dublin-based financial advisor who is considering recommending a particular investment fund to a client. The advisor has recently invested a significant personal sum in the same fund, which offers a slightly higher commission structure than other comparable funds available to the client. Considering the regulatory framework in Ireland, which of the following actions best addresses this situation? Option A. Recommend a different, slightly less optimal but conflict-free investment to the client, while continuing with the personal investment in the original fund. Option B. Proceed with recommending the fund, believing it is still the best option for the client, and do not disclose the personal investment to avoid influencing the client's decision. Option C. Immediately cease all advisory services to the client without explanation to avoid any perceived impropriety. Option D. Fully disclose the personal investment and the commission structure to the client, explaining the potential conflict, and obtain their informed consent before proceeding with the recommendation. The correct answer is D. Fully disclose the personal investment and the commission structure to the client, explaining the potential conflict, and obtain their informed consent before proceeding with the recommendation. Explanation. The risk matrix shows a potential conflict of interest for a Dublin-based financial advisor. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the advisor to navigate their personal financial interests against their fiduciary duty to their client, all within the strict regulatory environment of Ireland. The advisor must prioritize the client's best interests above their own, a core ethical and legal obligation. The correct approach involves immediately disclosing the potential conflict of interest to the client and seeking their informed consent before proceeding with any recommendation. This aligns with the principles of transparency and client centricity mandated by the Central Bank of Ireland's Consumer Protection Code and the ethical guidelines of professional bodies like the Irish Institute of Financial Services (IFS). By disclosing, the advisor allows the client to make an informed decision, understanding the potential bias. This proactive disclosure upholds the advisor's duty of care and integrity. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the recommendation without disclosure, hoping the investment is genuinely the best for the client. This fails to acknowledge the inherent bias introduced by the advisor's personal investment and breaches the duty of utmost good faith. Ethically and regulatorily, this is unacceptable as it deprives the client of crucial information needed to assess the advice. Another incorrect approach is to recommend a different, less suitable investment to the client to avoid the appearance of conflict, while still investing personally. This is deceptive and still violates the fiduciary duty by not offering the client the truly best option available, even if it's the one the advisor is personally invested in. It prioritizes self-preservation over client welfare and transparency. Finally, an incorrect approach is to withdraw from advising the client altogether without explanation. While this avoids the immediate conflict, it can be seen as unprofessional and may leave the client without necessary guidance, potentially causing them harm. A professional advisor should aim to manage conflicts transparently, not simply abandon their client. The professional reasoning process for such situations involves 1. Identifying the potential conflict. 2. Assessing the severity of the conflict and its potential impact on the client. 3. Determining if the conflict can be managed through disclosure and consent. 4. If not manageable, considering alternative solutions like recusal from the specific advice or transaction. 5. Always prioritizing the client's best interests and adhering to all relevant Irish regulations and ethical codes. Question 20. Implementation of a thorough financial analysis is crucial for Dublin drivers when considering vehicle purchases. A driver is comparing two used cars. Car A, priced at Euros 15,000 with an estimated resale value of Euros 7,000 after 5 years, and Car B, priced at Euros 17,000 with an estimated resale value of Euros 8,500 after 5 years. The annual motor tax for Car is Euros 200, and for Car B is Euros 350. Annual insurance premiums are estimated at Euros 600 for Car and Euros 750 for Car B. If the driver plans to finance the purchase of either car with a loan that accrues Euros 1,500 in interest over the 5-year period for Car A and Euros 2,000 in interest for Car B, what is the net cost of ownership for each car over the 5-year period, and which car represents the lower net cost? Option A. Car has a net cost of Euros 13,000 and Car B has a net cost of Euros 15,000. Car represents the lower net cost. Option B. Car has a net cost of Euros 15,000 and Car B has a net cost of Euros 17,000. Car B represents the lower net cost. Option C. Car has a net cost of Euros 17,200 and Car B has a net cost of Euros 20,100. Car represents the lower net cost. Option D. Car has a net cost of Euros 10,000 and Car B has a net cost of Euros 11,500. Car B represents the lower net cost. Correct answer is C. Car has a net cost of Euros 17,200 and Car B has a net cost of Euros 20,100. Car represents the lower net cost. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a driver in Dublin, Ireland, who is seeking to understand the financial implications of different vehicle purchase options. The challenge lies in accurately calculating the total cost of ownership, considering not only the initial purchase price, but also ongoing expenses like motor tax and insurance, and then comparing these to the potential resale value. Miscalculating these factors can lead to significant financial strain and potentially impact the driver's ability to afford vehicle ownership. The requirement to adhere to Irish regulations regarding vehicle taxation and the general economic principles of depreciation and financing adds layers of complexity. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a comprehensive financial projection that accounts for all relevant costs and the estimated future value of the vehicle. This includes calculating the total outlay for the purchase, including any financing costs, the sum of all anticipated annual motor tax payments over the ownership period, the estimated total insurance premiums, and subtracting the projected resale value at the end of the ownership period. This method provides a true net cost of ownership, allowing for an informed decision based on a complete financial picture. This aligns with the principles of responsible financial planning and prudent consumer behavior, implicitly supported by consumer protection guidelines that encourage informed purchasing decisions. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to simply compare the initial purchase prices of the vehicles. This fails to account for the significant ongoing costs associated with vehicle ownership, such as motor tax and insurance, which can vary substantially between vehicles. It also ignores the impact of depreciation on the vehicle's resale value, leading to an incomplete understanding of the total financial commitment. This approach is professionally deficient as it lacks a holistic financial assessment. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on the monthly payment of a finance vehicle without considering the total interest paid over the loan term and the vehicle's eventual resale value. This can create a false sense of affordability, as the total cost of ownership might be significantly higher than initially perceived. This overlooks the fundamental principle of understanding the total cost of borrowing and the long-term financial implications. A third incorrect approach is to only consider the initial purchase price and the estimated resale value, neglecting the substantial annual expenses of motor tax and insurance. This provides a distorted view of the overall cost, as these recurring expenses can accumulate to a considerable sum over the ownership period, potentially outweighing the difference in purchase price or resale value. This method is flawed due to its selective inclusion of cost factors. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic, data-driven approach to financial decision-making. This involves identifying all relevant cost and benefit factors, quantifying them accurately, and then performing a comparative analysis. In this context, it means calculating the total cost of ownership for each option, including initial purchase, financing costs, taxes, insurance, and accounting for depreciation. This comprehensive evaluation ensures that decisions are based on a complete and realistic financial assessment, mitigating risks and promoting sound financial management.